I'm Tristan, and this is Thinking About Politics. So today, I'm thinking about the great American political divide, an oft-referenced and rarely defined term thrown around in the news I tend to watch. But you know what? I think I got this one all worked out. But before I lay it all on you, why don't you go ahead and hit that there subscribe, and make sure you don't miss the latest political musings. And if the spirit so moves you, why don't you go ahead and give us a like and a share, or leave us a comment. That sort of stuff really helps us out, and we'd be mighty grateful. All right. So, I'm working on my next episode on the Afghan government from 2001 to 2021, right? And whatever news I had on in the background used the term American political divide. And of course, remarking about how it was just worse than ever. Now, they didn't say it, but I am pretty sure they were talking about the left-right political divide. I mean, it was all but implied. Anywho, it's kind of interesting to think about a left-right political divide, because when you really spend your time examining the various constituencies that make up the left and the right, well, there's a great deal of variability between the beliefs of the people on either side. On the left, you have some folks who believe in neoliberal reforms, deregulation of the economy, and others who would prefer a more robust government and universal health care and things of that nature. On the right, you've got a hodgepodge of free market advocates, trade protectionists, nativists, religious zealots, and actual fascists. It is simply absurd that our political landscape would have broken along these weirdly fractured lines. It makes me wonder, what if there's another way to look at this divide? Maybe looking at this thing as a left-right problem isn't really going to get us many answers. What if, instead of focusing on the policies people land on, we focus on what motivates them to adopt a policy in the first place? In my head, I think I can separate everybody out into three big groups of voters. You have one group that is reasoned and thoughtful and takes in facts and makes a conscious choice regarding their political preferences. And then there's the more apathetic folks, or those who are voting out of mere inertia. Folks who adopt the political preferences of their parents or their friends or their neighbors or community. Political chameleons who kind of like blend into whatever's the most popular. And then there will be what you might call the emotional voter. Someone who lands on a policy decision out of sheer terror, justified or otherwise, or some other strong emotion, anger, resentment, hatred, fear. Now, it is my experience in 21st century American democracy that nearly every single voter thinks that they are that first group. They are the reasoned voter who takes things in and seriously considers them and makes a conscious choice. However, I think it's clear that most of us are actually the second or third group. We are emotional voters, and we are voters out of inertia. Everybody thinks they're reasoning things out, but in my experience, honestly, those folks are very few and far between. And this has not, been to the benefit of our political culture either. Or the world. What if instead of looking at this as a left-right thing, we think of this as a center and periphery type thing? What do I mean by center? By center, I mean the economic and political center of society. People in that group have access to the best jobs, the best education, they grow up in the best housing, they have the best health care. For them, America is that land of milk and honey that we are all told about as children, and the streets are indeed paved with gold. This is the America we put up on billboards and we advertise in the movies. It's not a race, but it highly correlates to being white. It's not a location, but it highly correlates to urban areas and the coasts. So what do I mean by periphery? What I mean by periphery are those folks who live at the edges of where things happen, where people who live there have limited control over their community, either because they're dependent on the center or the center just dominates them outright. There's less housing choice. There's limited health care. Public education is just a little bit worse. Folks from the periphery generally find themselves looked down upon by folks from the center. For them, America is a land of scarcity, where it's dog eat dog, where survival depends on the freedom to be able to move and adjust to the circumstances. Self-preservation depends on this kind of autonomy for them. And this is the hidden America. The one that even when we show it on TV is played by really good-looking actors with all fine teeth. It ain't a race, but there's more brown and black folk here as a proportion of the population, at least compared to the center. Folks in the periphery are struggling to survive. The poorer you are, the harder you work. Period. And those who have not been poor and who feel like they have worked hard are right now getting angry at me. But let me explain. I am sure you've worked hard. Everybody does. But the fact of the matter is, unless you've had that experience of grinding poverty, you really have little understanding of the mindset. You can't know what other folks are going through unless you've been there yourself, right? And that goes for everything. but we can at least have a little bit of empathy, try to understand the things we might not understand. So for people on that periphery, the name of the game is trying to gain access to the center and all it has to offer. Look for ways to improve their lot. In looking for ways to improve their life, the first thing someone at the periphery is going to do is they are going to work. They are going to work well. They are going to work hard. Our first strategy is going to be to work to build up a nest egg to attain the center. But when your economy is such that the cost of living outpaces the money you can make from working, you force those folks in the periphery to look around for another solution. If they cannot work hard enough to save up that nest egg, to make it into the center, you're going to discourage that strategy of work. Folks on the periphery will look to try to find another option. And in the United States, we're granted, in theory at least, the right to vote, subject to certain exceptions. It's quite natural for the population in the periphery, which outnumbers the population in the center, to try to use the political machinery of the state to make changes in their lives, to make life better. And how are they going to make things better? Well, generally, the answer is going to involve investment. Investment by taking material from the center into the periphery and developing it that way. Now, this is going to be opposed by some number of the center. It is. Some folks are not going to want to invest in the periphery. They're going to want to keep it all for themselves. And because the center has better access to the economic, media, government, and educational apparatuses, their opposition is going to punch well above its weight. And this opposition is going to cook up wedge issues to drive between members of the periphery. So a lot of blood and ink gets spilled trying to prevent a brown, black, and white alliance out at the periphery. They'll stop blacks and whites from marrying, from forming partnerships. They'll tell whites that this country really belongs to them, and the reason why they're working so hard out in the periphery is because of all the brown and black folks. They will use religion to hypnotize people into submission and political passivity. Hashtag not all religions. Some definitely cut the other way too. They'll use politically irrelevant issues to shock and divide members of the periphery along cultural lines. And in all fairness, yeah, it's easy to divide members of the periphery because we're a big, large, and diverse group. We're not a singular. What ought to unify us, if I can just editorialize for a moment, is that we recognize the equality of one another and do all the stuff we can to improve the overall state of things, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us. But rather than use the power of the center to bring us all together, it seems at least some members of the center really find their political future in keeping the periphery divided. They work to keep us apathetic or keep us voting predictably so that we're easy to gerrymander around. Or they try to terrorize the hell out of us by saying that there's terrorists everywhere and caravans of children. I don't really know why people are terrorized by the idea of caravans of children, but this is a weird country. What are you going to do? So the long and short here is this. America is divided. And when you hear people talk about the great American political divide, I don't want you to think about left versus right. I want you to think about center and periphery. Remember, there are folks out there who want to develop the periphery and give it the same advantages that people have in the center. But there are groups in the center, not all, but some, who hate the idea, and they think that they benefit from disunity. Anywho, this is really just one way to look at it. And it kind of resonated with me, and so I just wanted to share it with y'all. Interested in what people think about this narrative and what we can add to it. But, yeah. That's going to be it for me. You've been great. Hope to see you again, but until next time.
I ain't got time to kiss you now. I'm busy with